The standoff felt electric, charged with a palpable tension that hung in the air as Lieutenant Colonel Jackson Hayes remained inches from Sergeant William Barrett, who displayed an unflinching discipline. Hayes's words had become a direct challenge, an affront not only to Barrett but to the very essence of the British military tradition that the Queen's Guard embodied. "You are in violation of standing orders regarding interaction with the Queen's Guard." Barrett's voice rang out crisply, cutting through the thick tension that enveloped them. The crowd around them held their breath, caught in the drama unfolding before their eyes. Even the tourists, who had initially seen only the spectacle of the changing of the guard, now understood they were witnessing something much deeper, a clash of military cultures. In that moment, Hayes felt the shift. Surrounded by the gasps of onlookers and the charged murmurs of his fellow Americans, he could sense not just their disbelief, but their mounting tension. This wasn't just a disagreement between two soldiers. It was now a challenge to his authority and an affront to his service. Barrett's unyielding stance sparked a fury within Hayes, a frustration boiling just beneath his disciplined exterior. "Are you defying a direct order?" Hayes shot back, an edge creeping into his voice, demanding an answer from a guard who remained as still as stone, eyes forward and unwavering. "It is not a matter of defiance," Barrett responded, calm and collected. "Standing orders dictate my duty to the Crown first. Your rank does not supersede my oath while I am on royal grounds." His words hung in the air, heavy with authority that made the lieutenant colonel's heart race with indignation. The tension thickened, and around them, the international guests began to murmur. Hayes looked back to his colleagues, sensing their discomfort. Colonel Wilson pressed through the onlookers, his frustration palpable as he stepped into the scene. "Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, this isn't the time," Wilson hissed, but Hayes brushed him aside, eyes locked on Barrett. Had the guard dared to lecture him? "Military might isn't based on standing still and looking pretty, Sergeant." Hayes sneered, pushing closer, as if he could intimidate him into submission, but Barrett's stance did not falter. Soft gasps erupted from the crowd, with one voice rising clear above the others, an elderly man clad in military medals watching the exchange unfold. "You are out of line, young man," he said firmly, stepping closer to Hayes. "You mistake their discipline for weakness. Each of those guards has served in combat, just as you have." A flash of embarrassment flickered across Hayes's face. How had he provoked this crowd against him? "I'm just stating facts, sir," he retorted, his voice more defensive. "Facts," the elderly gentleman challenged, his voice steady. "What you're seeing is not mere pageantry. It's a commitment to duty that transcends a battlefield. These guards are prepared, just as you are." Hayes was caught at a crossroads, the glimmer of doubt creeping into his mind, but he shoved it aside, asserting himself once more. "You might see them as soldiers, but I see men frozen in time, refusing to engage their instincts. Adaptability is our essence, not standing like statues." The elderly man shook his head, disappointment evident in his eyes. "Perhaps, Colonel, you should learn that discipline means adjusting to many types of situations, including respecting those who stand fast, even when it seems they are doing nothing at all." Without warning, Hayes leaned in even closer, drawing the attention of every person gathering around them. "Sergeant," he called, his voice low, ripe with challenge. "Are you truly prepared for battle? Or do you prefer to just stand there and look the part?" Barrett's expression remained unyielding, but there was something in his gaze now, a flame of discipline igniting. "When I was in combat, sir," he replied quietly, standing steady and maintaining focus amidst chaos saved lives. "It is a different type of engagement." Around them, whispers echoed, and Hayes finally felt a precarious shift in the balance of power. The crowd was right. This wasn't merely about military protocol. It had become a philosophical debate on the very nature of soldiering. Enough of this. Major Davis piped in from the sidelines, sensing the tension escalating into something unmanageable. "This isn't a training ground, Colonel. We are guests here." But Hayes was a man driven by pride and honor, and he had no intention of backing down. "If you truly believe that, Barrett, then show me. If you're as tough as you claim, then salute me. Show me that you honor the chain of command, even here." In that moment, as the words left his lips, the electricity in the air shifted once more. The crowd tensed, laughter suppressed and replaced by the weight of anticipation. Would Barrett react as Hayes expected? Would he submit to the show of authority? For a heartbeat, the silence stretched, all eyes locked on the guard. Would he break the facade, let the world see the cracks? Then, like a punch on the jaw, Barrett's hand shot up with precise fluidity, an elegant salute that encapsulated the history of his duty, the unyielding loyalty to the crown. His eyes held firm, unwavering as he commanded respect in a way Hayes had never expected. The crowd erupted into a mixture of applause and whispers. People were intrigued, captivated by the quiet power radiating from the soldier. It was a performance they had not seen coming, a rebuttal that rang louder than words. Hayes's cheeks flushed with embarrassment as he stood dumbfounded. Royal protocol had turned on him, shattering his expectations. He felt thrust into the spotlight, but in a way that was not favorable. "Humble yourself, Colonel," the elderly gentleman urged quietly, still watching Hayes with keen eyes. "You've witnessed today what true discipline looks like, whether you choose to acknowledge it or not. Learn from it." Sergeant Barrett returned to his post without a further glance, his expression frozen in the true essence of his duty, steadfast, loyal, and unwavering. Around him, the crowd buzzed with a fresh energy, tales of culture and military tradition swirling through the air. In that very moment, Jackson Hayes realized he had miscalculated the strength of the British spirit and the unyielding character of those who served. And as the echoes of his challenge faded into history, he understood. This wasn't just about the clash of military honor. It was a lesson in humility, a reminder that every culture held value, and respect should reverberate across every uniform. With the day's events etched into the annals of both British and American history, Hayes walked away in quiet reflection, knowing he would never view the Queen's Guard or their unwavering discipline in the same light again.
The murmurs of the crowd faded into a tense silence as Sergeant William Barrett held his salute, the echoes reverberating in the charged atmosphere. Lieutenant Colonel Jackson Hayes was at a loss, still grappling with the unexpected show of discipline before him. For a moment, time stood still, and the world around them blurred into insignificance. Feeling the weight of dozens of eyes upon him, Hayes shifted uncomfortably, the embarrassment of the situation beginning to gnaw at his pride. "You think that gesture changes anything?" he shot back, reasserting himself, desperation creeping into his voice. "A mere salute doesn't prove combat readiness, Sergeant. Adaptability on the battlefield does." Barrett lowered his hand slowly, the crispness of the gesture emphasizing the gravity of the moment. "Adaptability, sir, is maintaining composure under pressure. It's about knowing one's duty and honoring it in every situation. Today, that means standing my ground, regardless of rank," he replied, his voice unwavering. Hayes felt the heat of defiance burning in his chest. "You think that's enough? Just standing still?" He took a step closer, trying to bridge the gap between them. "What happens when bullets start flying, Sergeant? You'll wish you had spent more time adapting." The eyes of the crowd grew wide, the tension palpable as they awaited Barrett's response. "The adaptability you speak of isn't merely about movement but about mental readiness, Colonel. How you face chaos while remaining true to your sworn oath," Barrett countered, his voice steady, imbued with the weight of hard-earned experience. As the words hung thick in the air, a commotion erupted on the fringes of the gathered crowd, distracting both men. A surge of tourists pushed closer, eager to capture the escalating drama on their phones. Among them, a shadowy figure slipped through, unnoticed by most, a man in a dark coat, his eyes sharp and calculating, fixed intently on the unfolding confrontation. "Enough," Hayes barked, finally turning to address the onlookers. "This isn't entertainment, ladies and gentlemen." The crowd recoiled slightly, shifting their weight, sensing the crackling tension alongside their surprise at the display of authority. Barrett stood firm, taking a breath to regain his composure. "With all due respect, Colonel, you've made it entertainment. Perhaps you've learned something today," he replied, an undertone of challenge woven into his voice. "You're in the way of serious military discourse, Sergeant," Hayes retorted, irritation flaring like wildfire in his chest. "I'll ensure this is written into your record." "Do what you must, sir," Barrett said coolly. "It will reflect more on you than on me." The crowd buzzed with excitement, captivated, but Hayes was too stubborn to relent. He glanced over to Major Davis, who looked uncomfortable, caught between the two men. This was supposed to be a diplomatic visit, Davis muttered under his breath, readying to defuse the situation. But before he could intervene further, the shadowy figure stepped forward, drawing everyone's attention. "Colonel Hayes," the man said, his voice cutting through the crowd's murmurs with a chilling clarity. "Your point about duty is well taken, but it seems you've misjudged the situation entirely." The crowd parted slightly, revealing the man's sharp features and the insignia of a high-ranking British officer on his lapel. Gasps rippled through the tourists as they recognized him. "General Alexander Hayes," someone whispered, eyes wide, disbelief turning to excitement. The figure exchanged a curt nod with Barrett, causing everyone to fall silent. "General," Hayes echoed, his own heartbeat quickening with realization. "You're here. At this moment. In all of this chaos." "Indeed," General Hayes replied, his gaze shifting between the two soldiers. "And it appears I've walked into quite the spectacle." He gestured with a slight hand to the surrounding tourists, who grinned with anticipation. "You've showcased a fascinating portrayal of military decorum between our two nations." "This is hardly the time for theatrics, sir," the colonel bit out, his voice strained. "I need clarity and respect among ranks." "Respect," the general mused, tilting his head. "Indeed, a critical element of military service. Valor is often exhibited not in the clash of wills but in maintaining one's principles in the face of adversity." He turned back to Sergeant Barrett. "You demonstrated that perfectly, Sergeant. Excellent work." Barrett's posture remained rigid, but there was a flicker of satisfaction in his expression. Still, he kept his eyes on Hayes, waiting for the colonel's next move, tension taut like a drawn bowstring. "And yet, I can't help but wonder," General Hayes continued, his gaze locking onto his counterpart, "if you're simply here to belittle our allies, Colonel Hayes? Is that your primary motivation?" Hayes opened his mouth to speak but faltered, realizing he was trapped in his own rhetoric. The general's words resonated too closely with the crowd's perception. "Or perhaps you're here to challenge every soldier's oath, asserting that only your approach to military strategy is valid." General Hayes's voice dripped with measured condescension. "If that were the case, it would be a shame, especially given our shared goal of collaboration here today." Sweat beaded on Hayes's brow. This wasn't how he'd envisioned the day unfolding. He had pictured accolades and respect, not an unyielding guard and a disapproving general. "Doubt and misunderstandings can lead to grave mistakes in our alliances," the general continued, voice barely above a whisper, yet heavy with authority. "Your role at this summit is critical for NATO, yet how you conduct yourself sets an example or breeds disrespect." Before Hayes could respond, Barrett interjected. "You're right, sir. Respect must flow both ways, both from the ground up and the top down." He turned his gaze back to Hayes, the challenge lingering like vapor in the air. A silence enveloped the scene, the weight of Sergeant Barrett's words sinking in. Colonel Wilson moved closer to Hayes, his expression conveying disappointment but perhaps understanding. "Colonel, I believe you should take a moment to reflect on your approach. The way you handle this situation will set the tone for our partnership moving forward," Wilson advised, shooting Barrett a respectful nod in acknowledgement. As the crowd watched the spectacle unfold, suspense thick as smoke, it became readily apparent. Relationships between divergent military traditions were about to confront a new reality. Could Hayes acknowledge the strength in Barrett's discipline? Would he bend, or would he remain steadfast in his beliefs? "Maybe," Hayes began slowly, the words clawing their way out, "there is merit in your approach, Sergeant." Barrett remained composed, but a storm brewed in his eyes. The crowd held its breath, witnessing a powerful moment of reckoning between two fundamentally different worlds.
"Maybe," Barrett echoed, leaning ever so slightly into his personal space. "Or maybe your willingness to learn from this experience could lead to a stronger alliance." With the stakes raised higher than ever and the crowd still agog at the unfolding drama, Hayes felt the pressure mounting, forcing him to confront his own biases. This moment could define not just his day, but the very principles that would carry through the NATO summit. Suddenly, he realized that it wasn't just the uniforms or the medals that mattered. It was the character behind them. Could he accept that strength looked different across borders? Maybe. Hayes hesitated, thoughts racing. Maybe this is a lesson worth learning. The general's knowing glance met Barrett's fierce determination, and the crowd went silent, waiting to see how this exchange between old rivals would dictate the course of a unity. Maybe this is a lesson worth learning. Hayes finally conceded, his voice barely above a whisper, yet the weight of those words challenged his very identity. Barrett's eyes narrowed just slightly, assessing the sincerity behind Hayes's admission. Recognizing a lesson is only the first step, Colonel. The real measure is in how you choose to apply that knowledge moving forward, he replied, an edge of defiance still sparking in his tone. The general's gaze flicked from Barrett to Hayes, a flicker of approval dancing within the depths of his scrutinizing eyes. Leadership isn't just about authority, it's about understanding. And understanding breeds respect, General Hayes stated, slowly inching toward a delicate bridge of reconciliation. A knot formed in Jackson's throat, a mixture of resentment and reluctant respect tightening his chest. He had entered this day prepared to prove himself, yet it was he who stood corrected, exposed before the crowd now buzzing with anticipation. As whispers ignited among the spectators, Hayes felt the enigmatic shadows of his own arrogance creeping in. He was surrounded by his fellow officers, yet isolation clawed at him, prompting a more profound realization. How often had he dismissed the traditions and values of others? Turning slowly, he surveyed the crowd, observing their fleeting expressions of intrigue, disbelief, and hope. Would they witness a rekindled sense of unity or further discord? Perhaps a moment to think, he said at last, breaking the tense silence and his own stubborn resolve. I acknowledge that I might have misrepresented our partnership. Sergeant Barrett, I invite you to share your views, stately as they are. A ripple of surprise washed over the crowd, skepticism mingling with tentative hope. Could the lieutenant colonel actually be yielding? Barrett took a breath, his guarded demeanor softening as he sensed Hayes's willingness to explore new ground. Adaptability in combat requires understanding the full scope of our duties. What may seem like immobility on the surface is often a calculated exercise in focus and awareness. Yes, but what do you do when the focus must shift? Hayes countered, still feeling the weight of his earlier bravado. In combat, soldiers must be ready to move on a dime. Precisely, sir, Barrett replied, nodding. But consider that movement is not solely physical. A soldier can adapt mentally and emotionally even within the strict confines of duty. Our oaths and training shape that balance. Around them, the crowd leaned in, captivated by the exchange, the thick tension morphing into fascination. Colonel Wilson exchanged glances with Major Davis, both men recognizing this as a chance to recalibrate their approach to the summit ahead. You say maintaining focus is essential, Hayes said slowly, wrestling with his own preconceived notions. But what if that focus hinders effective response when every second counts? What if you die for adhering to rigidity? Barrett took a step forward, unwavering. Then that would be the price of my dedication to my oath. What you see as rigidity, Colonel, is a testament to the unwavering will of those who serve. It's a choice made in complete understanding of risk. Isn't that what we all face as soldiers? A palpable silence swept through the crowd, the gravity of their conversation deepening further. In that moment, something unspoken passed between the two men, adorning a alliance forged from respect rather than mere rank. Then, just as the air began to clear, a commotion erupted on the far side of the palace grounds. An urgent voice called out, cutting through the atmosphere with sharp intensity. General, we have a situation. Barrett's demeanor froze, the gravity of the moment shifting abruptly. General Hayes turned sharply, his commanding presence reasserting itself. What's happening? A young staff officer rushed forward, breathless and wide-eyed, the chaos of the palace grounds reflecting in his startled gaze. There's been a security breach. Multiple intruders have entered the premises. The crowd gasped in unison, uncertainty rippling through them like an electric jolt. Barrett's instincts kicked in, every ounce of training rushing back. He snapped into action. Secure the perimeter. We need a lockdown. Wait! Hayes barked, stepping forward, adrenaline surging through his veins. We need to coordinate our response. General Hayes or not, we're facing a real threat. The staff officer nodded, sensing the urgency, and quickly relayed orders into his radio while Hayes turned to the onlookers. "Everyone, I need you all to stay calm and move away to safety. We have an operational situation at hand. Might I remind you, Colonel, that you're on royal grounds." General Hayes interjected, the authoritative tone returning. "We must follow protocols concerning royal security." "Protocols don't protect lives, General." Hayes shot back, tension flaring between them. "Now is the time for immediate action." Barrett stepped between them, raising his voice above the din. "We don't have the luxury of debate right now. Delegates, follow Major Davis to the rear of the palace. Everyone else, stay low and move away from the walls. We will handle this." As people scrambled to comply, Hayes forced himself to focus, pushing aside the tumult in his chest. "Sergeant Barrett, take your position to protect the entrance. I'll lead the search party. We need to find these intruders and protect the guests." "Not alone," Barrett replied firmly, his eyes blazing with determination. "You might outrank me in title, Colonel, but today we're equals in service. We watch each other's backs until the situation is handled." In that instant, a seed of camaraderie blossomed between them, forged in urgency and the grim reality of their unfolding circumstances. Time suddenly slipped into overdrive, their principles and differences fading into the background as danger loomed ahead. "Let's move," Barrett commanded, adrenaline propelling them forward as they rushed to their assigned posts. Hayes's heart raced, every beat reminding him of the stakes, how quickly perceptions could flip, how easily alliances could be born from the splintered fragments of rivalry. With the palace in disarray, the two men forged their paths through chaos, ready to face whatever threat awaited them, shoulder to shoulder, just as soldiers should. The distant echo of muffled chaos surged through the air, promising an impending confrontation that would demand every ounce of strategy, respect, and understanding they had cultivated in that very moment. The tension crackled in the air as Sergeant Barrett and Colonel Hayes dashed toward the towering palace doors, the urgency of a situation amplifying every sound. The frantic footsteps of guests fleeing, the panicked shout of officers coordinating the lockdown, and the distant echo of chaos swirling outside. "Stick together and keep your wits about you," Barrett yelled, his instincts sharpening as they stepped into the shadowy corridor. The sunlight filtering through the large windows cast eerie patterns on the marble floors, and for a moment uncertainty washed over him. But there was no room for hesitance. "We need to control access to the main hall," Hayes replied, surveying their surroundings with hawk-like intensity. "If they breach those doors, we lose the advantage." "Agreed. I'll secure the northern exit," Barrett said quickly. "You take the south and rally support if needed. We can cut them off." "On my mark," Hayes replied, but the words barely left his lips before a loud crash resonated through the hall, splitting the tension like a knife. A pair of armed intruders burst through the door at the far end, their faces obscured by masks, chaos rippling in their wake. "Contact!" Barrett shouted, adrenaline surging through him. Without hesitation, he bolted toward the two intruders, every training course he'd taken surging to the forefront. He was faster, a blur of motion, and he could see one of the assailants raising a weapon. "Sergeant!" Hayes barked, but it was too late. Barrett sprang forward, his body colliding with the intruder just as their weapon discharged, the deafening crack echoing in the hall. Or perhaps it was only the beating of his heart. They both hit the floor, and the weapon skittered across the ground. In the struggle, Barrett rolled, gaining the upper hand, but his eyes darted across the room to Hayes, who was grappling with a second intruder. "Cover me!" Hayes shouted, dispatching a series of quick punches in an attempt to subdue his attacker. Barrett scrambled to his feet, breathing hard, fighting against the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He grabbed the fallen weapon as he stood, knowing that a display of assertive force would be necessary if they had any chance of controlling the situation. "Stop! Drop your weapon," he commanded, leveling the gun at the first intruder. Caught between a rock and a hard place, the masked assailant's eyes widened with fear. Just as it seemed Barrett had contained the breach, the second intruder elbowed Hayes hard and broke free, launching himself toward the fragile windows overlooking the courtyard. "No!" Barrett shouted, lunging forward, but it was too late. The assailant hurled himself through the open window, disappearing into the fresh air below in a reckless jump. Barrett turned back just in time to see Hayes grappling with the first intruder. A fierce exchange ensued, fists flying and bodies crashing against the opulent furniture. But Hayes was distracted, his eyes darting toward the broken window. "Focus!" Barrett yelled, closing the distance once more, but the sound of an explosion reverberated outside, thunderous applause of chaos. "Reinforcements!" Hayes exclaimed, his attention shifting entirely, heart racing at the magnitude of the threat. "They are staging something outside. We have to stop them." Barrett nodded sharply, the adrenaline replacing doubt completely. They had no time to waste. "Let's go." The sound of screeching tires echoed from the courtyard, followed by frantic shouts. They dashed down the corridor, taking corners at breakneck speed, nearing the source of the commotion. But just as they approached the outer doors, a shockwave erupted, forcing them back into the thick stone wall. Dust and debris fell from the ceiling, raining lightly around them like confetti from a grim celebration. "Status!" Barrett shouted, wiping dust from his eyes. 2 escapees headed for a vehicle. "We need to," Hayes began, but an explosion of noise interrupted him, their ears ringing from the chaos outside. "Go! We can't let them get to it." Barrett urged, and they sprang back into a sprint, finding their footing among chaos and shouts. As they burst into the courtyard, the world exploded into a storm of color and sound. A rapid-fire exchange of gunshots erupted around them. Police forces tried and contain the situation while the masked intruders fought for whatever objective they held dear. Barrett's eyes shifted to the fleeing car in the distance, realizing the threat was even worse than he imagined. A van emblazoned with the emblem of a notorious organization that had been targeting diplomatic functions for months. "They're making a run for it," Barrett shouted, adrenaline propelling him toward the last remaining chance to stop them. Just as they were about to reach the vehicle, a figure stepped out, tall, cloaked, and menacing. "Stop right there," the figure commanded, the voice low and riddled with malice. Barrett hesitated for a split second, caught off guard, while Hayes charged forward instinctively, determination and bravado coursing through him. But the moment was fleeting. With a swift motion, the cloaked figure revealed a detonator. "You think this ends with a chase," they said, a sinister grin illuminating their masked face. "We're just getting started." Time slowed to a crawl. Barrett's heart raced as he surveyed the scene, the realization hitting him like a freight train. "No!" he yelled, but the words felt impotent against the reality of the moment.